It's about time to get started this morning. Yes, sir. Okay, so we're about to get started this morning. Um, there are some cards in the foyer on that back table for recent visitors. So if everyone will get the chance to go sign those cards, we'll send those out to thank the visitors who have been coming. So that's new. And also, Eric tells me that materials for his Sunday evening class on prayer are also in the foyer on that back table. So if y'all haven't picked that up yet, please pick that up so you can have that ready for tonight. Okay. So welcome everybody. Good morning. We're going to be continuing our discussion on the influence of a woman. And the lesson material for today is about Rebecca. I'm going to give a quick background. We're not going to go through and read all the background material. I'll summarize, and then we'll get to the events that we'll be discussing for today. All right, so we left off last week talking about Sarah. That's really the transition for this morning. We'll start with Sarah dies at the age of 127 years old. 127. Remember, she had Isaac at 90, so Isaac is 37 years old when his mom passes away, which back at this time was relatively a young man at 37 because they lived quite a while back then. So Sarah passes away, Isaac's 37, and Abraham wants a wife for Isaac, not amongst the people where they currently are sojourning, but he wants a wife for Isaac from their relatives. So he picks his most trusted servant, and whether or not Isaac's aware of this little expedition, we don't know. But the servant goes to find a relative from Abraham's family for Isaac to marry. And the servant is given some very specific instructions on how to do this. But even beyond that, the servant takes it upon himself to ask God for guidance in finding this woman. And everything goes according to plan and, frankly, according to God's providence here. And it's quite obvious that God is involved in this servant finding the right woman for Isaac. And we're not going to go back, but in Genesis 24, we have this account. And what we see in Genesis 24 is this woman that is found is a cousin of Isaac. She's young. She's probably in her teens, based on the customs of the time and based on how she's described, but we're not told exactly her age. She's hospitable. She's kind. She's a hard worker based on what we see here in this account. She's described in the passage as being very beautiful. And also based on her actions, it's obvious that she's brave and she's trusting in God. So based on all those characteristics, it sounds like an absolute perfect bride for Isaac. So she agrees to go back with the servant and marry Isaac, who she's never met, obviously. So there's a lot of trust there. Have I got that right so far? Anyone have any clarifications, corrections on that bit of background? Sound about right? Okay. Isaac and Rebecca fall in love and are married, or are married and then fall in love. It's unclear as to the sequence there. But we see in Genesis 24, verse 67, to sum all this up, it says, "Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death." So it sounds as if 3 years after the death of Sarah, Isaac still had this need to be comforted concerning his mother's death. It seems to me that there was a strong relationship between Sarah and Isaac. And so this gets us caught up with Rebecca to this point. So starting in the context that I gave you for today, which was Genesis 25, 19 through 28, let's pick up there now, having that background established. Rebecca is barren, and it's been 20 years since her marriage to Isaac, and there are no children. Are there any indications in the text that there is this urgency to have a child because of the promises? Can we tell if that really is what is motivating them here, the way it was for Abraham and Sarah? Remember, with Abraham and Sarah, they were really worried about having the child because God had given them a promise about blessings through a child. Do we see that same concern here expressed? Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's the problem. The barrenness may be just an issue on its own. And it may be that they're motivated to have children because of the promise, but it's not stated. It seems to me that Rebecca just really wanted to have children, which is not unusual for a wife in this culture that we find her in, because having children was very valued, right? It was a sign of success for women to have kids, and she's 20 years now without children. So Isaac prays to God on her behalf. Is that what y'all's versions say when it talks about Isaac's prayer? On her behalf. Okay. Did Rebecca not pray to God asking for children? Why was it Isaac's job? I think that, yeah, so the love he had is motivating him to do this. And it seems that's the case. And it's not that she didn't pray. We're just not told. I'm sure she prayed. But what's expressed here is that Isaac is concerned for her and wanting this for her, and he prays to God. And God hears Isaac, and she becomes pregnant. But there's an issue right away with the pregnancy. What's the problem? What's that? Was twins a problem? Okay, so that's the weird part. So twins is not perhaps that unusual. It's uncommon, but nothing to be concerned about. But there's a struggle within. And I get from the text here, it's more than just the normal, oh, the baby's kicking. This is something kind of violent, so much so that she's really worried about what's happening inside her, and she goes to God. She goes to God. And God communicates directly with her. How did that happen? What's the avenue here of this communication, this two-way communication between God and Rebecca? Well, he speaks to her, and we really don't know a whole lot about this other than what the verses tell us, that God spoke. So that's kind of, I think, unique and unusual, but he does. And so clearly she's a woman that has faith in God. She goes to God, and God talks to her. So that's unique and I think important here. So what does God tell her? What's going on with her? There's two nations struggling, okay? And he gives us some more information as well. After that, what did he say about these two? The older is going to serve the younger. That's not normal in this culture, but that's going to be the case here. So that's coming from God. So let's speculate a little bit more. Does Rebecca share this with Isaac? Okay, and Tia says it seems that she doesn't share that with Isaac. And what makes you think that? Okay, because he wants to bless Esau. Okay, anyone else got a different take on that? I would assume that, I mean, they're a close married couple. that they would share this. If she has this concern and there's something going on, and then she goes to God and God talks to her, why would she not share that with Isaac? And we don't know. It doesn't say, and you may infer based on what happens later that she didn't. But it seems to me this close married couple would be the type that would communicate, especially something this big, something that's bothering her about what's going on inside her body. She gets information. I would expect her to share that. It's speculation, but that's my speculation. And it does complicate things later when we see Isaac's actions towards Jacob and Esau. Yes, sir. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So what Eric's saying, for those who didn't hear that, is that he could have been told that and still not fully understood what that meant, and how that related to his blessing his older son. So what's the age difference in these two kids? I mean, Jacob comes out holding on to Esau. I mean, they're born together. So this older serving the younger, it's all just because of birth order. There's not any kind of difference in life experiences and wisdom because one's older. Well, they're born at the same time. But there is a birth order that was important. And is it possible for the oldest child in a true older child situation, not a twin situation, is it possible that the older child could get the birthright and the blessing from the parent and still end up serving the younger child? In a practical sense, that can happen. I mean, did Joseph's brothers end up serving him? Was there any doubt that he was not, the birthright holder and the blessed child as being the older? Yeah, there's no doubt. And so it could still happen. God's prophecy could have all played out with Jacob being served by Esau, even without these other things. So it's all kind of hazy here as to what God intended with these two boys, other than the fact that the older was going to serve the younger. Any other clarifications, comments so far on where we are? So the boys are born. They're very different in characteristics. And Isaac and Rebekah had favorites. Why did Isaac love Esau? Because what, Nikki? It says he loved the meat. And the verse is really clear on this. And we're in Genesis 25, verse 28. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game. Is that a good reason to have a favorite child? Is there another reason here? All it says is because he loved the meat. And then the rest of that verse is, but Rebekah loved Jacob. It doesn't say that Rebekah loved Jacob more than Esau. It says she loved Jacob. And it can be implied, and some people who comment on these verses note that it's important the way it's stated. They both loved one child, and it's almost as if they didn't love the other. It's not like they had a favorite and they loved one more than the other. It's implied almost that they didn't care for the other child. They only loved the one. Ricardo, somebody had a hand up? Yes. Okay. The Ricardo speculates that it could have been a lot more here than just the food. It could have been his whole characteristics, the characteristic of being outdoors and active and just a more hands-on kind of person, a macho. manly man. Well, that's certainly going on here. It's just interesting that the Bible says because of the meat, and it leaves it at that. But yeah, it could be a lot more involved. Okay. And so why does Rebecca love Jacob? It doesn't say. There's no comment. He is a peaceful man, and he lived in the tent. And really, what that's saying is he was civilized comparatively for a person who lived out in these sojourning lands. He was more of a civilized personality. That's his characteristic. It doesn't say that's why she loved him, but it seems that that's probably what's going on here. Okay. Other comments, clarifications, just getting the story put in place. Okay, so then the passages skipped ahead, and we're going to pick up in Genesis 27 with the instance of this blessing that Isaac wanted to give to Esau. What is Isaac's condition as we move into Genesis chapter 27? Blind, that's clear. What else? Old, okay, it says that. Anything else we can determine based on what we find in 27, chapter 27? It sounds like he's on his deathbed, or he believes he's on his deathbed. And we get that because he tells Esau, as part of the instructions, I don't know how much longer I have, I'm paraphrasing. So hurry up and go get a meal, and I can eat the meal, and I can give you this blessing. Okay. Now, the reality is he's going to live for 40, some commentators believe 43 more years after this instance. Certainly, we know that Jacob goes away for 20 years after this occurrence here and comes back, and Isaac's still alive. So he's not on his deathbed, but it seems like he thought he was. He was certainly sick, and we don't know if this condition was temporary that he was in right now, and that's what led him to want to go ahead and make this blessing before he dies. But he's not about to die. He's certainly got some ailments, and he's got some age. But he's not on his deathbed. He may think he is, but he's not. Okay? That's something that I'd always, reading this previously, I always imagined him to be like right at death's door, and needing to get this done with some urgency here. And he may have thought that. Yeah, he was very limited because of his blindness. Right. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of responsibility for his sons. And his sons now are, it's disputed, the age of the boys, but 40s to 70s is what the age range is for these two sons at this point. So they're matured, and surprising that Jacob is not yet married, but he hasn't. So the plan is Isaac wants to bless Esau before he dies. He gives Esau instructions to go prepare a meal, which has included some wild game. And then when you come back, I'll bless you. But Rebekah hears this request, and she tells Jacob to go and steal this blessing. That's her plan. Now, he's hesitant to do this, but she's determined, and she says, when he pushes back a little bit and said, if I get discovered tricking my father, it could end up that instead of getting a blessing, I'll get a curse. And she says, if that happens, a curse be upon me, which I've always taken to mean I'll take the blame for this. But as I read this more, I don't think that's what she's saying here, because clearly it goes poorly. He gets the blessing, but it goes poorly, and she never steps in and tells Esau, hey, this was my doing. Don't blame Jacob for this. Blame me. She doesn't do that. When Isaac gets upset, she doesn't tell Isaac, hey, don't be upset at Jacob. it's my doing. She doesn't do that. So I think she may have literally meant, if you don't get the blessing and you get a curse, the curse be on me. But he does get the blessing. So I think in her mind, we got it done. So, the ends justify the means. We're good here. Um, but that's the story. And there's some fallout to this. Obviously, Isaac is upset when he realizes he's been tricked. Esau is planning to murder Jacob now, and he's only waiting for his father to die. So Esau seemingly also believes that Isaac is about to die, and he has to wait just a short amount of time before he can take his revenge out on Jacob. So the lesson sheet for today is how Rebekah influenced Isaac. And really, she influences Jacob and Esau to a lesser extent in this story. We're going to answer these questions based on Isaac, and we'll go back and we will talk about Jacob. If there's been any confusion about who the influenced individual was, I apologize for that. And time spent looking at how she influenced Jacob isn't wasted. We'll talk about that too. But let's go through for now on our little grid sheet here and answer the questions and see what kind of conclusions we can draw about how Rebekah influenced Isaac. So, what was the relationship between the individual, wife and cousin? And I'll just point this out while we're here. We have a lot less information about the married life between Isaac and Rebekah than we did with Abraham and Sarah. We don't have a lot of information other than these tales, with the exception of Isaac does the same thing his father did when they travel. When Abraham asked Sarah, can y'all hear this okay? Sounds okay to me. We're good? Okay. Abraham asked Sarah to say that she's his sister because he's worried about other men killing him. Isaac does the same thing with Rebekah. He asked her to claim that she's his sister. At least Abraham could partially claim, well, she really is my sister. Isaac can't claim that. So they both made that same decision, and there's some repercussions that are actually not too bad. But in that instance, previously, when Abraham pulled this stunt, God intervened with the leaders and revealed to them that she was truly married and they needed to be careful how they treated her. It doesn't happen with Isaac and Rebekah. They're discovered. Do y'all remember why or how they're discovered that it's not really a sister relationship? Yeah, they're affectionate, the two of them. And so that's interesting about their relationship too. They're very affectionate. So when the king sees them being affectionate towards it, he knows that's not normal behavior for a brother and a sister. He figures out, this is your wife and you've lied to us. So that's another characteristic about their relationship that I forgot to mention, is that we don't have a lot of information, but they were affectionate towards one another, so much so that they weren't able to lie about being sister and brother. Okay, next box. Was the relationship between the two short-term or long-term? Long-term. Overall result of this instance, and we're talking about Genesis 27, 1 through 17. Overall result, was it positive or negative for Isaac? Negative, because he was deceived, and that partiality, it continues to be a problem. Okay? Anybody else? He was very upset, yeah. Okay, so he didn't take it as a positive at all. All right. Could you argue that this was a positive result for him? Anyone want to try to argue that? Yeah. So that's the only thing I could think of is if you said, well, God's plan was carried out. I guess you could, but like I said, I think God could have done this without the trickery here. So I think really, I would agree that overall this is a negative outcome for Isaac here. Huge. Yeah, the effect it's going to have on the marriage is really going to be, I would imagine, and we're not told how it plays out. But when one spouse takes to misleading the other to get what they want, that's really going to affect the marriage poorly. And we'll take a look at that as we move through this. Method of influence. What's the method? Deception. Okay, that's what I'm hearing, and that's true. That's what she did. Why didn't she just ask him to bless Jacob? I'm speculating here again. Why not just ask Isaac? Why not please just bless Jacob? Well, she knew that Isaac had the favoritism. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. I don't think he would have done it. I wasn't there, but from what we read, it seems like Isaac is very committed to Esau, and doesn't have much regard for Jacob. So she wasn't going to get it if she asked for it, I don't think. So to her, I think that must have meant she was any method she could get to work was what she was going to do. So Nikki, do you have a comment? Oh, Ricardo. Oh, right. Yeah. Going back and revisiting the talk she had with God would have been worthwhile. But again, it didn't. God's message to her didn't require that Isaac do anything. And, and Tia, you have one more? Well, God had reiterated the promises made to Abraham to Isaac. So Isaac should not have forgotten God's promises to him. Hmm? Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was a lot going on yeah, Isaac had a lot going on, disputes about water wells with the people who lived in the land, and the struggles he had with raising a family as they're moving through this country, and then his wife was barren. So I mean, yeah, and we forget, just like they possibly had forgotten that God was active and working. Yes, Rob. Right. Right. Very, very different methods employed by the wives, and I think with Rebecca, her approach is very damaging to the relationship, as Melanie's already mentioned. So let's keep going towards that. What was the impact of the influence? What's the result of this? Okay, well, a different son than was intended. Yeah, Jacob is now going to receive the blessing, and Esau gets a blessing, but the blessing that Esau gets is really not a blessing at all. It essentially confirms that you're gonna have to serve your little brother. So, and that was the result of this. Jacob has to run for his life, and Rebecca will never see Jacob again. That could be the curse, to have your favorite son have to run for his life, and she's never going to see him again. So that really does not play out well for her. Was the influence a result of a conscious effort? Yes, obviously in this case. Was this instance part of a larger pattern of influence? Do we see Rebecca doing this kind of things prior to this? We don't. Nothing's revealed of this sort at all. And yet, when you look at what happens in this situation, how quickly she was able to come up with this plan and how easily she pulls it off, it makes you think that if she hasn't done this before, she's at least been thinking about this. And she lies, or she comes up with this lie, seems like so easily. And the plan, she's got everything planned out. You know, all the little details she's ready for. Laverne? Maybe so. Yeah. Yeah, so Laverne's comment is clearly Isaac loved her. It's possible she didn't love Isaac as much as he loved her. And he's not noticing these types of actions. Uh-huh, right. Name. Right. He says so. Hmm. Right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. It's not that God is requiring these actions, but God is going to use these actions to His purpose. Well, yes, and that could. Yeah. Yeah. That could be. That could be her motivation is she's trying to accomplish God's will. But God didn't ask her to do this. And so, and so not being told precisely what her motivations are, you know, we struggle with. Is it just her favoritism coming forward in this case, or is she trying to further God's will? It's not real clear. Eric? Right? Twice. Yep. Right. Yes. You've already got the birthright. Right. Yeah. That's right. And so there's a couple of things going on here. The birthright already having taken place by now, and really the blessing is just a counterpart to the birthright. And so that could be part of the motivation. And also, what did God think about Esau's behavior in selling the birthright? Give me the other verses that talk about that. It said God says he despised the birthright. God was really displeased with Esau's so easily giving that away or selling that off. There is a character flaw in Esau, and there's character flaws in Jacob too. Jacob's going to make a change. We don't see that Esau ever had any kind of change. One more friend here before we got to move on. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, Laban. Yeah. Yeah, Laban's going to trick Jacob later. Jacob's going to continue. Yeah, yeah, that's true. The family is all about, you know, anything to get what we want. We're going to run out of time here, so I'm going to keep us moving. Um, was Isaac aware of the effort to influence? Obviously not. He was tricked. He didn't know anything was going on until it was too late. Would Isaac have been better off or worse off without the influence? I'm speculating here again. What do you think? Would he have been happier? Yeah, because he would have gotten blessed his favorite son. His sons would have, in theory, stayed there together. You wouldn't have had this breakup of the family. And now he's dealing with a wife that he can't trust. If he didn't already have, if he still trusted her to this point, moving forward, they're going to have problems trusting one another. So I think he would have been happier. So better off, yes. How that would have played out in God's plan, we obviously don't know. So this one here is some more speculation, and it says so in the question. What would have been the result of the situation without the influence? If Rebecca hadn't taken action here, what would have happened? Esau would have got the blessing. Would that have changed God's plans? Yeah. Right, yeah. Okay. We won't go too far there. But perhaps Jacob would have tricked Isaac on his own. Who knows how this would have played out. But clearly, Rebecca was involved in making the situation happen. Okay, so what are some takeaways we can get from this so far? Overall takeaways, as it relates to influence, as much as we can. Melanie? Right. Right. Very good. That's right. Yeah. And so the takeaway being that just because deception works sometimes doesn't mean that that's okay with God. Okay. What else? Other takeaways? Sandy? God doesn't need our help. Okay. And that's true. And we mentioned that, I think, last week, the week prior. God doesn't need our help to accomplish his wills. And yet sometimes he wants us to take action, and so there's that balance, we have to find. We pray to God for something, and we can't just sit back and wait for things to happen. God wants us to be active towards his will. So I think that's true here, though, is that God didn't need her to do this, to accomplish his will. Rob? Mm-hmm. Right. So the direct approach would have been appropriate here, and just to, instead of the trickery, just to reason and to rely on God's word and seeing what that could accomplish. Julie? Okay. Yep. That's right. So I think that's a big takeaway, is that within a family relationship, if you have this game of favoritism going on, it can poison the marriage. Because look at where they started, where the marriage started. We had this perfect bride for Isaac, and she had all these traits that we would value, that God valued, and they loved each other. And that's clear at the start. But here we find that there's this conflict that's just rotten to the core, and it's making it impossible for this family to do things honestly with each other. And it gets worse after this. So I think that's a huge takeaway. It doesn't matter where we start with our marriage. If we don't take care of our family, if we allow favoritism to occur, it can rot the marriage. And I think that's what we see here, to Julie's point. Yes? Mm-hmm. So we're almost out of time. I'm going to cover a few more things. We have maybe 3 minutes left. Um, there's some thought questions here. We've talked about one extensively already, and that was, what was Rebecca's motivation? Well, it doesn't say. We can speculate that it was God's message to her, that she was trying to help God, or it could just be the favoritism. I tend to think it was the favoritism because God's message or God's word to her could have been accomplished without her actions. But we'll move on because we're going to run out of time. Why didn't Rebecca just ask Isaac? We talked about this one already. I think we've answered that. So before we run out of time, let's talk about how she influenced Jacob for just a second here, because Jacob doesn't want initially, at least he says he doesn't want, to go through with this trickery. He may have wanted to. He was just throwing up maybe some things for her to think about. And her response to him was, the curse will be on me if this goes poorly. In other words, just do what I say and it'll work out. And he does exactly what she says, and it does work out for him. Did he have any other course of action in this situation based on her instructions? He did. What else could he have done? Okay, he could have talked to his father. That was not one I thought of, because just based on the story and the relationships, that would have been very, I mean, to rat out his mom would have been, he could have said no, yeah. But her influence on him was, and it could have been that he wanted to do this anyway, so maybe it was just an accomplice. But you could say, well, she got him to go against his father's wishes and to trick his father in this elaborate scheme. That's really influential, and it demonstrates her power over him. But knowing his character and knowing he's already done some things to upend his relationship with Esau, maybe not. So the reaction from Esau to all this is, I'm going to kill Jacob, and as soon as my father's dead, that's what's going to happen. Rebecca hears of this, and she tells Jacob that he needs to go away for a matter of days, how she describes it, until Esau's anger subsides. But that's not what she tells Isaac. What does she tell Isaac the reason for sending Jacob away is? To find a wife. And she has this whole story about the women around here just drive me crazy. I will die if he marries one of these women. And we know Esau already had a wife or two from this region, and it did drive her crazy. But she doesn't tell Isaac, look, Esau's going to kill him. We got to send him away. She tells him a whole different story. Why? Why isn't she honest at this point with Isaac? No, possibly she doesn't want to revisit that and get pulled into that other. I just think it's a bad pattern we're seeing here when she just can't be honest with Isaac. Again, she gets what she wants. Isaac does send Jacob away to find a wife. But as I said, she's not going to see Jacob again. It's not a matter of days. It's 20 years he's gone. And when he comes back, Rebecca's dead. Isaac's still alive. So she gets him safe, but the whole thing is just not playing out the way she intended. Yvonne? Yeah, I think Esau wasn't just talk. He was inclined to want to kill Jacob at this point. Well, okay, but then does Esau kill Jacob when he gets a chance later? By the time Jacob comes back, Esau is hugs and kisses with Jacob. It's totally changed. Maybe it's maturity. Esau still makes bad choices. In fact, he's so influenced by his father that when he hears Jacob's being sent away to find a wife, he decides, well, my dad doesn't like the women around here. I'll go marry one of my relatives. And he picks Ishmael's daughter, of all people, which is not a good, God's not pleased with that either. But that's how influenced Esau is of Isaac. It doesn't say, my parents don't like the women around here. I'm going to go find someone else to marry. He says, my father, Isaac, doesn't like the women. So anyway, they're all so compartmentalized because of this favoritism. They can't function as a family. They function just among the little groups. So, okay, we're out of time. It's going to be Potiphar's wife next Sunday, and we're going to talk about how she influenced Joseph and Potiphar himself. So two different sheets to fill out. I think it's the front and back. It's on the table in the back. Thank you.